The timing was intriguing. In the middle of 1974, Australia had occasion to mark the decade anniversary of the 1964 Australian Beatles tour, which saw 350,000 in the streets of Adelaide and 250,000 in the streets of Melbourne. The idea that the lower continent could again be so smitten by a quartet of pop performers that the reaction would seep into the national psyche was so fanciful that it was entertained by nobody at all. But even if a few far-sighted folk had sensed another sensation on that scale, the odds are that their gaze would have been directed again at Britain or at the United States, certainly not at Sweden. Although Honey Honey charted modestly in the wake of Waterloo before the year was over, for the rest of the world, Abba was a one-hit wonder, unlikely to be heard from again. But Australia sensed something it liked, and as 1975 began, the Abba onslaught took hold. Ring Ring, a track that had been initially released in 1973 before they even had their name, was suddenly in the top 10. Then came the number ones, I Do, I Do, I Do, I Do, I Do, Mamma Mia and SOS. Not since the Beatles had commanded the first 6 positions on the Australian hit parade in April '64 had there been such an airwave blitz. In fact, the Beatles' history book records were daily coming under siege by these new Euro wonders. She Loves You had spent an epic 42 weeks on the Australian charts. Fernando would achieve 40. Hey Jude was number 1 for 15 weeks. So too would Fernando. In their Polar studios in Stockholm, Bjorn Ulvaeus and Benny Andersson crafted sumptuous, infectious, hook-laden pop singles that proved irresistible from one end of the globe to the other. They were listed on the Swedish stock market and for a time became the country's second biggest corporation industry after Volvo. Such was the near magical relationship with Australia that Best of Abba notched up over 1.3 million sales. With a copy in one of every 3 homes at the time, it is still the biggest selling album here ever. So the lower continent became a testing ground. It was here, during a frantic national concert tour, that director Lasse Hallström shot Abba the Movie, with a young Robert Hughes, later the star of the sitcom Hey Dad, portraying a dogged journalist out to secure an interview. Like A Hard Day's Night, the film documented the level of madness that engulfed them as devoted fans camped outside hotels and tracked their every move. It wasn't great art, and there were myriad continuity errors and some nonsensical portrayals of Australia, such as Sydney being just down the road from Melbourne, but it did capture, time capsule-wise, the country being turned upside down by an act that, in some regards, looked as if it had been hatched on a cruise ship. But the cheesiness, campness and dodgy costuming was all integral to the appeal, as we would later see with the popularity of Muriel's Wedding and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Abba finally secured number ones in the major markets. Dancing Queen topped the US charts at the very end of '76, and Knowing Me, Knowing You cracked the summit in the UK in early '77. By then, we'd witnessed the long-awaited Australian concert tour, which, as I said, provided the backdrop for Abba the Movie and had them playing outdoors to vast audiences that included prime ministers and proles alike. Agneta and Anni-Frid's derrieres celebrated to a level that Kylie could only dream of. Our curiosity sated, they slipped somewhere from our embrace, though the hits kept flowing. Money, 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 The Name of the Game, The Winner Takes It All, and so many more. Bjorn, when he returned to Australia to help cast Mamma Mia in 2000, said, "It's a haze" of his original visit. He said, "I remember a few things. I just went past the Mayan Music Bowl and that brought back memories of lush green parks and millions of people." Benny had spoken of tremendous memories of Australia. "We were there for a few weeks and we had time to do things in between, swimming with seals and relaxing. It was wonderful." Well, you don't see much of the relaxing in the film, which has a fevered and frantic pace to it. The four ABBA members often look as if they've come from behind on things, which may be because Holstrom consciously kept them in the dark about much that he was doing. For instance, he didn't initially tell them about Robert Hughes, leaving them to become increasingly puzzled and a bit irritated by this man who kept appearing at their press conferences asking silly, intrusive questions. There are scenes in Abba the Movie shot in Stockholm after the Australian tour and passed off as Melbourne that don't fool anybody for a moment. But this wasn't intended to be a documentary. It's a pop fantasy with a paper-thin plot and lots of cliches. But it does work, and it does hold up surprisingly well over 30 plus years. By 1982, the ABBA journey was all over. The pressures of such intense fame, including alarming death and kidnapping threats, taking their toll. Agneta and Frida recorded solo, but Bjorn and Benny found greater satisfaction in creating the rock opera Chess with British lyricist Tim Rice. The ABBA flame was kept burning, appropriately enough, by a deft Australian quartet, Bjorn Again, who artfully recreated an ABBA stage experience actually experienced by relatively few at the time, and took it all over the world, headlining shows at London's Royal Albert Hall. As with the Beatles, ABBA have not been short of lucrative reunion proposals. We get one ridiculous offer after another, but it's never going to happen, revealed Bjorn. Asked about the reasons for the new ABBA boom then taking hold, he conceded honestly, "I have no idea. I'm still waiting for someone to explain it to me."